Hey guys, it's Danny. Today it is the 1st of November, so as you know, it's time to recap the orchids that we had in bloom for the month of October. Now these are the new orchids that bloomed or the sequential bloomers. There are other orchids in bloom, but we've already featured them in September, and the point of this video is to give you some ideas about your orchid wish list. Also, I shall remind you that you can actually vote for your favorite orchid this month following the link to the poll below in the description, and at the end of the year I will declare the Orchid of the Year as chosen by you guys. It's a little fun thing that we did last year, you guys loved it, so we're gonna do it this year as well. And without further ado, let's look at the orchids which were in bloom in October. First off, a new bloomer for me. You guys have seen her in all of my videos recently because I just adore her. You know me, I love orange. This is just straight up my alley. This is a beautiful Cattleya Chester. The former name of this orchid is Cattleya Chester because it is a cross between a Cattleya and a former Sophronitis. I personally prefer to refer to the Sophronitis rather than Cattleya because the Sophronitis has some special traits in comparison to average Cattleyas. They are much smaller, and I hope you can see how tiny this orchid actually is. I would call it a miniature orchid, even though you can absolutely go smaller in the Cattleya alliance with the Laelias, but it is really small and it is a space saver in my opinion, and I do believe it is quite suited for a home environment as well. I don't usually keep it in the same amount of light as my Cattleya. I also did not grow it outside because it's a little bit too hot. I prefer to grow this one inside since I don't have a whole lot of experience with it yet, but I'm definitely into trying out even more Sophronitis crosses or even the Sophronitis itself. Even though now it's a Cattleya, I will call it Sophronitis. Let's talk about this one though. Look at that bloom. It is an absolute orange. You know when you have those rusty shades which can be a little browny, a little yellowy? No, this is in your face orange. The flower is just so incredibly bright. And even though if you look at pictures on the internet, you can have variations of the flower with more yellow veins, this one seems to be more of a gradient type of color, which I do not mind. In the center we have a beautiful yellow splash of color which extends to the lip a little bit. The edge of the lip is a pretty red color, and overall we have this beautiful orange which extends to the sepals and petals as well. The flowers are not extremely big. I would say maybe 4 centimeters across. You can see it has a pretty symmetrical shape. I cannot say it's longer rather than wider, and also it is not fragrant. This particular flower has been in bloom for a while and you can see it's starting to fade off. This flower on the other hand is a little bit newer. Being that this is the first bloom of this orchid, I actually purchased it as a young orchid. The flower spike has a little kink here. It's not perfectly straight. That's why the flowers look a little weird. Definitely would recommend this orchid if you cannot provide as much light as a proper Cattleya would require, and also if you grow your orchids in more temperate conditions. Next up, an orchid that for some of you needs no introduction. This is a NoID white Cattleya hybrid that we call Princess Jacky. One of my viewers named her after the white dove that I used to have back in my balcony days. It is blooming for the second time this year, however only on 2 flowers this time because she's slightly wobbly. She slightly suffered a bit of root loss, but this is a strong plant, perfectly adjusted plant, and we do still have quite a lot of roots, so you can see the pseudobulb is not super affected, but the blooming is. Last time we saw this orchid in bloom, she had 4 flowers, or 5 if I remember correctly, but it doesn't matter because every time she blooms, the most beautiful fragrance just fills my nose. This is my absolute favorite Cattleya, and yes, it is just a plain white Cattleya, but that fragrance, it is absolutely amazing. Many of us have tried here to describe the fragrance. I think it has an underlayer of creaminess to it. It's a very complex scent, but also what stands out is the smell of orange peels or orange fruit. It is floral. You can also detect some citrus notes there as well. well, but overall the fragrance is like nothing I have in my collection. Absolutely, there's no other orchid which comes close to how this orchid smells. Now, there have been debates whether this is an intermedia variety alba or harrisoniana alba. It can be one of them, it can also be a hybrid, and I just don't want to give an ID, you guys buying it and then being disappointed that there is no fragrance, or the fragrance is just a typical rosy fragrance that Cattleyas have. That's why I don't want to put an ID on it. But if you have one of those orchids, let me know if the description of the fragrance rings any bell to you guys. If you have an ID'd white Cattleya which looks like this. This is a bifoliate. You can see it produces sheets. It produces slender pseudobulbs, so it's not one of those plump pseudobulb types. And it's just a very, 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 very vigorous orchid. Even though I messed around with its root system, she still flowered, she still grew nicely. And overall, it's just a joy to grow. Here in Europe, we sometimes find it in flower shops or garden centers whenever we're lucky. Next up, we have an orchid that I like almost equally as much as the white Cattleya. This is the beautiful Brassavola Little Stars. She is a hybrid. And as you might know, I have a thing for Brassavolas. I just adore them. This is an orchid I grew outside and she has done beautifully. Last year she suffered an accident. She fell from my shelf and broke some new growths, disturbed the root system. So last year we didn't have a super spectacular show, but this year we have. And this is one of those orchids that fills the greenhouse as well, but in the nighttime. This is a nighttime fragrant orchid and it has a soapy perfume, which I know might not sound appealing, but imagine the best French soap you've ever smelled. It has indeed a very strong soapy fragrance, but I personally like it. I do know there are people who don't really enjoy it all that much, but not many people are completely repulsed by it. It has to be strong to attract nighttime pollinators, and as you can see, the color of this orchid is nothing to write home about. It's green, white. This is because it needs to stand out in the nighttime, so we don't really need a lot of colors other than very light shades. Anyway, currently we have 5 flower spikes in bloom on the orchid and another one that did not bloom just yet, a 6th one, because in the process of falling she did actually break some new growths, so she needed to start new growth once again. She's currently slightly off-seasoned, and also typically this orchid, ever since I purchased it a few years ago, she has bloomed around Christmas for me. This is the first year that I have her in full bloom in October because I grew it outside. This orchid for me bloomed once a year until now. I'm not sure if I can get more out of it in my climate, but definitely she is 2 months early because I grew her outside. She has done beautifully, but the next goal for next year is to make her bloom twice a year. Can you imagine? And for those of you who are not acquainted with Brassavolas, I give them the exact identical care that I do to the Cattleyas, and I have a tutorial down below about the Cattleyas. You guys should let me know if I should redo the Cattleya tutorial and include outdoors growing. I think that should be fun, so let me know if you're interested in that type of video. In the meantime, enjoy the Brassavola. I think this is a very, very beautiful hybrid. She's not a space saver, she's a big girl, but that show is just amazing. Next up, we have a Vanda orchid in bloom. Here, finally, we see some Vandas in bloom this year, right? This is the Vanda Pachara variety Pink. I do have the blue variety, which is actually more indigo or purple. But anyway, this is the magenta pink one. It is just such a lovely show, isn't it? The Pacharas, in my opinion, are great beginner Vanda hybrids. They're very prolific, and I did manage to get 3 blooming times out of one of them throughout the year. Typically, I get 2, I can get 3, and in very bad conditions, I can get 1. I do believe this is a second blooming for this one though. The Vanda Pachara Pink, just like the blue variety, has very, very big flowers. They're almost as big as my palm. They have this wonderful tessellation to them that looks a little bit like a spider web since it's Halloween. Too bad it's not orange, right? Can you imagine something like this in orange? Okay, never mind me, I digress. This orchid is not fragrant. Pacharas are not known for their fragrance, sadly. They're typical big vivacious orchids, which I find to be very beginner friendly, very easy to grow. They're very forgiving if you do some mistakes, but then again, I do find Vandas generally forgiving. Even though they can get set back, they can go through the motions of recuperation, they're just very forgiving in comparison to other orchids. That's just my opinion. So either the pink variety or the blue variety, I can definitely recommend it to any beginner. All you need to have is space. This is just one of those very big girls, so if you like her enough, definitely go for it. If you don't have too much space, there are some smaller Vandas on the market that are much better suited in smaller spaces, and they will definitely give you less headaches than this one. Next up, we have a wonderful Bratonia Shelob Okika that I actually received recently this year from one of my lovely viewers. What is the difference between the Shelob Tolkien and this one? The variegation. The Okika variety has variegated leaves. If you don't know what this is, if you're new to orchids, check the video down below in the description. I do talk more about variegated orchids. I love them, as it just so happens. And oncidiums which are variegated, kind of rare around these parts, so I'm super happy to have it. Thank you so much for sending it to me. Look how pretty the variegation is. This is a recovering orchid actually, and it's amazing that it bloomed like it did. As a hybrid, this is a very strong individual if you give it half a chance, of course. And I am glad it is recovering now, but in the back here we have a very tiny growth, as you can see. This one didn't have any roots. The other one, I think it did have one root. So you can see it did bloom, but on a very tiny flower spike. In any case, it is pretty remarkable that this orchid bloomed, considering she is recovering. But anyway, it is a wonderful hybrid which looks like a Brassavola but has the colors of a bellina. It is purple. The sepals and petals have a brown purple color, and they have this wonderful leopard print pretty much. And on the lip we have a more solid purple color. We also have the brown spots, and overall it just looks wild. It has the shape of a star or a spider. Brassavolas are typically called spider orchids, and the pattern of a wild animal. What else can you ask for? A fragrance. This is a fragrant orchid, but it's not really what I would call perfumey. It has a peppery fragrance, very spicy. There are people who love the fragrance of Brassavolas and Bratonias and all of these hybrids. I personally don't, but this is not why I grow these types of orchids. I grow them because of the flowers. They're just wild and beautiful. And what a beautiful display we have for a recovering orchid. Next up, another Oncidium Alliance intergeneric. This is the Aliceara Tahitian Dancer. It used to be called Cattleya. I do have a presentation video for this one. I didn't have it in a lot of time, but I found it for sale again, either at the beginning of the year, either at the end of last year, so I had to have it. It is a beautiful color, and you know me, I don't like purples, but I like this purple. The orchid itself is a vigorous hybrid. We have another tinier flower spike there, and the best thing about this orchid is that it can be fragrant, but I have a funny suspicion not all individuals are. I'm not sure if it's a climate thing. For me, this one is not fragrant, but there are people who suggest this orchid does have a fragrance. So with this plant, either some people detect a fragrance while others don't. Maybe it's that type of compound which is not detectable by everybody, or some individuals do possess a fragrance while others do not. Anyway, if you think this is appealing and you consider it a fun thing to look forward to, definitely go for this orchid. It is a beautiful intergeneric. I'm growing it in the leca. It's one of those which is not fussy quite at all with the medium, just grows roots because it likes to and does well because that's how this orchid works. It's that type of orchid, it's not fussy. So definitely I would go for it. You can have beautiful pendant displays, but if you prefer them upright, you can definitely stake them. You know me, I like pendant stuff. So that's how I grow my orchid. The flower spike is flexible, so it's not going to break, but it is rather fragile, so be careful that you don't brush into it, you don't snag it with your clothes and things of the sorts, because it is pretty fragile. It can also branch, actually. I have a little branch here, so obviously with good care you'll have even better results, and if you're lucky, you can even have a fragrance. Next up, we have another Premiere. This is a cross between a Brassavola nodosa and a Laelia purpurata variety Carnea 4N. And it is such a beautiful orchid. But right now, as it is with Brassavola hybrids I discovered, throughout its life, it becomes paler and paler. It does lose color. So I do have some footage from the beginning when this flower just opened, and you can see the lip is a lot more pronounced. and even the petals and sepals have this really nice pinky shade. Now it is really faded. It is still fragrant though, so even if it is a Brassavola hybrid, it does not smell in the nighttime. It releases fragrance in the daytime, and to my nose it smells pretty much identical to the purpurata that I had in bloom this year. It is a sweet flowery fragrance, reminds me of spring for whatever reason. It's not very intense, but now as I was bringing the orchid to the table, I did detect it. So it's there. I think you will enjoy it if you do like very subtle fragrances. It's not that type of very obnoxious fragrance that will kick you out of the room. So it's just something very soft, very flowery, and just beautiful to have in your room. As an orchid, yet again, being that it is a Cattleya Alliance hybrid, or actually intergeneric, hopefully still, because you never know when they reclassify stuff. It can happen overnight. So being that it is a Cattleya type orchid, I do give it exactly the same care as my other Cattleyas, and she's doing absolutely fantastic. I grew her outside, and I got the thickest roots that I ever got on this orchid, growing it outside. It also bloomed for the first time in this orchid's life, so maybe with the next bloomings, the flowers will get a little better. Oh, I can actually detect the fragrance, and I'm half a meter away. So definitely it is a very beautifully smelling orchid. If you don't mind the fading of the color, it is absolutely fantastic to have. It's not finicky, it grows in Leca beautifully like any other Cattleya, and really it's just a joy to have. It can produce multiple flowers on an inflorescence. I have seen at least 2 with Zane's orchid, so definitely something to look forward to in the future. Alrighty, my camera is actually running out of battery and I still have a few orchids to go. I have a feeling this will be a long video, you guys. Sorry, but I hope you enjoyed the pretty flowers. Next up, a Cattleya which is not in bloom anymore, but I do have footage with it. This is the Cattleya Ronnie Von. It is a pretty standard looking Cattleya. I don't know if this means anything to you guys, but to me the most common Cattleyas are the pale pink ones with a purple lip. It is really pretty. Doesn't really stand out. However, the fragrance on this orchid, again, it's one of those typical Cattleya fragrances, which to me smell like lilies, to other people a little bit like roses. Very typical fragrance, but so incredibly beautiful and intense. This is the best of the standard Cattleyas, in my opinion. Standard looking flowers, yes, standard fragrance, yes, but just much better than others. This year she decided to put out a peloric flower, which is a little bit surprising. Last year it didn't bloom like this. Mind you, this is the second time it blooms for me, so we might have a peloric gene mixed in the primordial soup that makes this orchid. Luckily, it is a peloria type that I like. It doesn't make the flower look unopened. There are those peloric flowers which have the petals way up in front, just like the lips. I don't like that peloria. This one I like though. It looked really pretty, didn't it? This orchid fell in the storm. I'm trying to stabilize her at the moment. I hope not, but I think she will be slightly set back because she was just out of her pot on the floor, roots broken. This while she had buds, actually. I'm surprised she bloomed. But yeah, I think the flowers faded a lot faster than I anticipated because she's kind of recovering right now. It's better for her not to have flowers anyway, but there we have it. Next up, one of the most beautiful inflorescences that I've ever had on a Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type or bigibbum type, however you want to call them. This is Dendrobium White Surprise. Isn't he a surprise? Now yes, this guy has been caught in the storm as well, and I showed you in a video, it has some botrytis on the very beautiful white blooms. This is one of the, let's say, downsides of growing your orchids outside. Yes, you get the benefit of the light, of the fresh air movement, all of those fun stuff, humidity. But then, if it rains, you get botrytis on very flimsy flowered orchids. It's okay though, but speaking about this, I did make this month a video regarding ailments of the flowers, which is a topic I don't see very much discussion on, so I'll link it down below for you guys. I also did make a tutorial on how to grow these orchids successfully, so again, check it down below. This particular dendrobium is one of those very big flowered dendrobiums. You can see it is actually, I believe, the biggest flower I've ever seen on a dendrobium. And even if it's pure white, it's all the more beautiful in my eyes. So I'll get you in closer, you will see the very unsightly fungal spots. That's how it is. Next time when this orchid will bloom, I will try to make sure that I shelter it from the rain, but this year we'll just have to do with the botrytis spots. This is a very easy to grow orchid, and as I was saying in the tutorial, I believe the key to success is light and heat. That's what these guys thrive on. Of course, you need to sustain this growth with proper watering and nutrients, which reminds me, I need to water this orchid. But other than that, I do believe they're very easy to grow even in a home. If you can find a southern location and maintain it as warm as you can, I think these orchids will just do great for you as well. So I do hope for great things in the future from this guy and the other dendrobiums. So let's take a look at those as well really fast, because I am pretty sure my camera will die pretty soon. Okay, so this is a little bit later. The battery died. Everything about this camera falls apart, but Christmas is coming, so I have my budget until Christmas. I will switch this camera, I'll buy a new camera. Anyway, back to the dendrobiums. Here we have another one. This is the Purple Happiness. Sadly, we have one of the flower spikes incomplete. It was broken in the storm, but that's okay. This is a much tinier flowered dendrobium. As you can see, I think it's half the size of the white one. But nonetheless, it is just as beautiful. I don't think I mentioned the white one is not fragrant. This one isn't fragrant either. There are some Dendrobium Phalaenopsis types which are, and I will mention here the Burana Green Star. There might be other hybrids. This one is not. None of the ones that I'll show you today are fragrant, but they are absolutely beautiful. Again, this is a very tall and big orchid which thrives on heat and light, and I am actually hoping for better displays. Now I know what to expect with the outside world. And the good thing about having a massive failure with your orchids one time is that you can only go up. You cannot really go down from here. So that's the mentality that I have after the storm. And the last dendrobium we're gonna talk about is the NoID Splash dendrobium, which I haven't been able to identify, but as you can see, he did take a beating in the storm as well. Some flowers are already fading, but what to do? Yet again, not a fragrant dendrobium, but it is one of those with bigger blooms. And this one is actually a little bit different than how it looked like when I purchased it. I actually think it rebloomed once at the beginning of this year for me, but now it looks totally different. Orchids can actually do that. They can bloom in a way in certain seasons and in a different way in other seasons. It has to do with their parentage if they're hybrids, or with the particularities of the species if they're species. This is a complex hybrid, no doubt, so there might be some genes that favor a change in pattern from time to time. I'm curious to see the next blooming. And actually my camera just gave me a battery error. Previously it didn't let me film, so fingers crossed we can actually finish today's video. And the last two orchids entered in the contest, as you know, the Phalaenopsis violacea and Phalaenopsis bellina. This is violacea, this is bellina. All summer long we featured them. Not going to insist, but there we have them. They're still in bloom and will continue to be in bloom in November as well, because we have buds. This one smells fruity, this one smells sweet and cinnamony. If I were to choose, it's hard, but I would go for the bellina, at least in this variety, because I prefer fruitier fragrances to sweet fragrances. Does that make sense? It's a personal preference, but both of them are absolutely wonderful, summer blooming, and due to the extended warmth in the autumn that we had, they're still in bloom and going strong, but I do believe this is the last bloom we're gonna have from them this year. Now, I will show you two more orchids, but I will not enter them in the competition because I purchased them with the flower spikes, with the buds, and with one of them I have a little issue. First off, the Doritis pulcherrima. I purchased it with the flower spike. She's a recent acquisition. The flowers did not last. They lasted 4 or 5 days, and then as a new flower opened, the other ones just faded. I also had bud blast on this orchid. I don't know if it's because it's a new orchid or because it's trying to create a new leaf and also new roots. She is growing roots. She's growing pretty great, but the flowers, yeah, they don't last. So we're not gonna enter her because obviously nothing very spectacular. I also want to learn more about this orchid. Maybe there's something she doesn't like in my culture. I'll figure it out. Although I do think it's unlikely, but I don't know. I need to figure this out. It might be a combination of things. She's a new orchid, but just letting you guys know, this is what my pulcherrima is doing. She's kind of losing flowers and buds. Not entirely sure why, but I'm researching it. And this is the second, another recent acquisition, but it came with a bud almost opened. I prefer to put in the contest the orchids that I kind of bloomed myself, or the orchids that came with a little spike and then it grew. I'm gonna leave this guy for next time, but I just wanted to show it to you. I don't remember the name because the tag has been lost somehow, but I'll put the name on the screen. He's a beautiful Paph. I have such an obsession with Paphs lately, and he is a mottled leaf Paph as well, with a nice little flower. It was one of those bargains that I found on eBay, and I said, why not? Why not treat myself with some orchids that actually do okay for me? So this has been the orchid show this month, and also about the length. We usually don't see flowers all that much because somehow it's not what my videos are focused on. So I'm thinking once a month having a flower galore, maybe it's okay, but I realize it's kind of long. Don't forget to vote down below, and with that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you've enjoyed it, and you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you like YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. If you're interested in the setup that I use, materials, pots, and so on, just expand the description. I have everything listed there. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!
Thank you.